Welcome to Impossible Bodies.
Well, welcome indeed. So while it's rainy and dark outside, I wish you all a very warm welcome to this seminar, a panel discussion we have tonight. It's going to be a conversation about the posthuman, and as you know, it's organized by BodyDrift and Impossible Bodies. I think many of the attendees here might already know it's an interactive, virtual, week-long experience about cyborgs, data, artificial intelligence, basically everything that interests us, right? Together with more than 30 participating thinkers, designers, hackers, artists, you name it, the organizers of this event constantly research the question, what kind of cyborgs do we want to become? And that's an interesting question, right? It goes beyond what kind of people do we want to be, what kind of cyborgs do we want to become? Before we dive into that, my name is Roanne van Voorst. I'm going to be the moderator tonight. And my normal job, if I'm not moderating this event or other events, is I'm an anthropologist of the future. So that means that I'm interested, like many of you, in future developments, in future tech, perhaps. But I'm even more interested in how this will affect us, normal human beings, and how it will affect society and the relationships between people and the things that we do. So what are we going to talk about? Not me so much, but the people who are the invites for tonight, and hopefully you as well, because through the Vimeo live stream, you can send in your questions later on. Please do so. And also, if you want to share something about this evening, please do that with #ImpossibleBodies. And this evening, the next hour or so, we're going to talk about the future. But we're going to talk about one that isn't as far away as it may seem, as we sometimes think. Because whether you're aware of it or not, we've already become cyborgs. So some perhaps more than others, but maybe you know somebody with an implant in his or her body, or something else that really improved his or her body. And, you know, I don't know how it is with you guys, but most of us are really fused with our mobile phones, right? It's like an extension of our hand nowadays. So essentially, that really is all that the concept cyborg means. It's a being with both organic and biochemitronic body parts, parts that may enhance the body, like well-known cyborg Neil Harbison, who I'm sure you know now with his antenna implant. Or maybe it's parts that may restore something, a leg that was lost in an accident. Or what about, what you see now more and more, a handy microchip in your hand that opens the door of the garage. Can be really handy if you have your hands full of groceries. So we may not have many choices in becoming cyborgs, the organization says, but we can choose what we allow to mold us. We can set aspirations for how and how far this comes to be. Where do we think the boundaries should be? Should we think that there are any boundaries at all? So tonight, like I said, we're video live streaming the event. And if you have any questions for the presenters, please share them with us so that I can share them again with the presenters of tonight, and we can take them into our public Q&A, which will hopefully be a lively discussion. And today we are talking about this topic with two artists. I have Agi Haines and I have Lucy McRae for you. And then I have the curators of the two current exhibitions, Impossible Bodies and BodyDrift, at Design Museum Den Bosch. And they will share artistic reflections on the constantly shifting landscape of the human body in relation to technology. And I have for you tonight, Frederic Baas and Ine Gevers. Now I'm going to introduce all of the speakers one by one, as they will each offer us a brief presentation, but I'm going to start with Frederic Baas. Now, Frederic works as a curator at the Design Museum Den Bosch, and his main task over there is to organize presentations on modern and contemporary design. Now, his most recent project, BodyDrift, I've already mentioned it a couple of times, BodyDrift, Anatomies of the Future is the whole sentence, the whole name, addresses the future of the human body and showcases work by designers and artists that explore the moral and technological boundaries between man and machine. So this exhibition is going to be the first installment in a series devoted to the broader Posthuman team. And I was very impressed to read that Design Museum Den Bosch has identified this as a focal point in both their expedition and their acquisition program. So you can expect more and more about that topic. As I understood, Frederic, I think you are going to introduce some of that work in a video, isn't that correct?
I will, yeah. It's a walkthrough that we shot in the last week of the exhibition. Okay, so here we go. We're diving right in. This is the angle of approach, the posthuman. We'll hear more about that later this evening. The exhibition design was by Bart Hess and Harm Rensink, and they created a series of front rooms to each group. And this is the actual entrance to the exhibition with a beautiful shoulder piece by Gijs Bakker, linking the theme also to our jewelry collection. And then we enter into the first room, which is work still related to the human body, and it's called Better Bodies. So this first group has work by Yifei Chen, Yun Kamai, Loan Fafan is coming up here, Valerie Daudet, Sarah Nuitemans there in the background. So all work meant to enhance, protect, or decorate the human body. It's a blend of contemporary and historical pieces. Here we have Hausrucker Co. In the back is upcoming is Ted Note, Anna Radjevich. This is a news feed that is in every group with items that pertain to the themes in the group. So it's actual news items. The second group is called the biometric body. So it's the body as a subject of surveillance in contemporary times. This is a triptych, as I like to call it, in the back by Lucy McRae. And then we move into the room with work by Heather Dewey Hagborg. Here is a movie by her, and another piece coming up that deals with DNA surveillance. Here is a showcase with work by Iris de Vries that is meant to mask your identity against biometric surveillance. And as you can imagine, in a show dealing with the future of the human body, I wanted a robot. So here it is, a robot arm. This is me, equipped with a camera, a project by the University of Halle, Robin Goodwill and Yang Ni. It snaps a picture of your face and then draws a biometric portrait, if you will, and it also reads your emotional state. And what I liked about it is that it does this by drawing, which I think is a kind of a human activity. So moving along, we come again upon Biometric Mirror by Lucy McRae. I imagine she will tell more about it herself. It was one of the few interactive pieces that we were able to put into actual use in the show because of the COVID-19 measures. Here we go into the third and last group, which is called Beyond the Body. So again, moving away from the body throughout the exhibition. So this is the transhumanist desire to do away with our current wetware. It also addresses issues of death, as for instance in this piece by Frederic Baas. And in the front we have a dream machine. It's called the Dream Machine by Frank Kolkman in collaboration with Swarovski. Unfortunately, this was an interactive piece that was not, we could not put to full use because of the COVID-19 measures. Going further into that third group is another piece by Frank Kolkman, a DIY surgery setup meant to help the uninsured in America that operate on themselves. This is another interactive piece by Arvid and Marie. That was, we couldn't use a massage chair. Joep Truijen, cataloging the human body for future reference. Then nearing the end, we have the Deep collection by the Fabricant, a fashion collective, work by Marta Giralt, dealing with what I will call virtual sexuality. And then we end the walkthrough and the exhibition in this meditative piece by Sarah Nuitemans, An Observatory of the Self. So that was our show. It was on until October 4th. And you can still, well, it lives on online in our third floor.
Thank you very much. And it seems like even if you showed only some of the highlights, that it's really worth to do a virtual visit. And I think I feel kind of lucky, and I think some of the attendees here are lucky as well, because at least we're going to see or hear more about Lucy's work later on tonight.
Definitely.
So that's really exciting. I do want to give the floor also to another curator, and namely, I was reading into the bio, Ine Gevers, who's called one of the Netherlands' most radical curators. Now that's promising, isn't it? She is the founding director of the Niet Normaal INT Foundation, developing large-scale art exhibitions focusing on urgent matters in society. And I think Frederic's film just already showed that the things that we talk about, it's not sci-fi, or it can be sci-fi, but it's also very much into the now, right? It's really about societal issues, things that we need to think about perhaps together. Gevers previously organized Ik en de Ander, this means in Dutch, me and the other, Art and the Human Condition, and the accompanying book, Voorbij Ethiek en Esthetiek. So the whole expo experience was called the highlight of the Dutch Design Week 2018, and is still touring worldwide. And her current exhibition, Impossible Bodies, investigates what kind of cyborgs we want to become, as we told before. So Ine, can you give us a highlight on what do you think, what kind of cyborg would you like to be or not to be?
Yes, we are showing now also a clip because Impossible Bodies exhibition has a virtual and physical part, and the physical part did not happen. No. Actually, the Impossible Bodies is the follow-up of Robot Love. That was the exhibition in 2018. And what you see here is different artists that actually like question and show, you know, that we have already been cyborg for a long time. You see here a work of Agi Haines, because Agi actually made an AR work. There are more augmented reality works in the show. This is how we actually anticipated the next COVID lockdown, so to say. Also, this one is an augmented reality work. It means that you can bring it to life in your living room. This, what we see here, is Nerd Funk. We will talk with them later. It's the next panel. And this is Pina Viola. Pina spoke yesterday. So we have a lot of festival event and performances and talk as well. What you see also, this is Valerie Dood. That's the one that we share, the BodyDrift and Impossible Bodies. What you see is that we have 3 chapters in the exhibition. Is what are cyborgs? We already are cyborgs. And what kind of cyborgs do we want to become? And this has to do with the fact that, you know, with cyborgs, a lot of, there are actually 2 terms that are associated with cyborgs. It's called transhumanism and posthumanism. And where they are kind of used interchangeably. And where transhumanism, of course, is much more referring to beautifying and perfecting our bodies through technology. Posthumanism goes a step further. Posthumanism thinks that technology, of course, has become our second nature and shapes us while we interact with it. So we become different kind of humans merging with technologies. So you now what you see now is actually the virtual environment where experience where you can experience the whole exhibition. And I just want to tell a bit more about what we did to explicitly focus on the posthumanism aspect, because it connects humans and the environment in which we grow up, live and work. And of course, posthumanism also sees an opportunity in the growing realization that humans are not the only intelligent people and beings on the planet. So it teaches us to be humble and examine our human-centric behavior. So technology could also be used to learn from and interact better with other creatures in our environment. Such a starting point makes life more like an empathic and spiritual quest in which the individual, not the individual, but the collective is embraced as a new source of living and dying together. And that's hence the question, what kind of cyborgs do we want to become?
Super interesting, and I think I would love to talk more about this later in the panel discussion. But I do think I'm going to keep my questions for now, even though I have many instantly, because we're actually happy to have Lucy here, who was already mentioned by Frederic. And just for people who don't know Lucy McRae is a science fiction artist. She's a filmmaker, she's an inventor and a body architect, and her work speculates on the future of human existence by exploring the limits of the body, beauty, biotechnology, and the self. And she will tell you more about her work, but what she does, she combines or works across installations, film photography, artificial intelligence, and edible technology. So this is a multi-talent, right? She's also regarded, and I'm going to say this because she's probably too humble to do it, as a thought leader who is really exploring themes around the things that we're also discussing tonight, the cultural and emotional impacts that science and cutting edge new technology can have on redesigning the body. So Lucy, if I understood it correctly when we just briefly talked, I think you have some slides to share with us.
Yes. Is that showing up?
Yeah, we can see it.
Thank you for inviting me, and also Frederic. It's great to see again the fly-through of BodyDrift. I'm just going to take you through a quick run-through. For the last 7 years, I've been making machines around the body using air and a vacuum. This was a more recent work that was developed through the pandemic called the Solitary Survival Raft, looking at what I thought was more of a faraway speculative scenario, the touch crisis, but suddenly in March this year, it became a reality, which I kind of found very shocking at the time, like everybody else. And so I work with computer researchers, synthetic biologists, and here, this is the biometric mirror, which was shown at Design Museum Den Bosch. I'm just going to show a quick clip after this. And what I like doing is physicalizing technology. And for biometric mirror, it was sort of about domesticizing it. So creating kind of cushions or textiles or fabrics. And so the biometric mirror uses facial recognition technology. It takes a photograph of your face and proceeds to psychoanalyze you. It tells you how weird you are, whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, your age, your gender, which are all things that are, especially under the microscope now, gender is becoming a continuum, a fluid. It's no longer black and white. And so these, through institutes, museums, galleries, for artists like myself, are opportunities to dive deeper into the ethics of artificial intelligence and to really understand who's making these algorithms and how can we provide an opportunity or gateway for things like accident and serendipity, which is really very much part of the creative process. I'm really attracted to the kind of history of the cyborg, and this is definitely not my expertise. You know, in the 60s, it was kind of Manfred and Nathan Kleins and Klein created this word that is something that's not less human. And I did a very quick study of cyborg through the lens of Google. So there we already have a bias, but it seems like cyborg has been trapped in a kind of masculine science fiction trope for some time. And that's why it's so important that we're having this kind of discussion, because it's been very limiting for since the 60s. And so in 2006, I moved from London to Eindhoven and was part of the probes team at Philips, trying to understand what technologies would be like 15 to 20 years. And this is really where I was taught to look at technology through an artistic lens, and where we were aware of what a cyborg was, but we were trying to create our own definitions. So very much not looking at anything that already existed and to try and break the mold and create, and for me, it was about kind of a fleshy future that wasn't stuck in any kind of existing science fiction trope. These were older tests that I did with Bart Hess, who was one of the exhibition designers of BodyDrift. And we met at Philips, so we were having these very high-tech conversations about the future of the body, and yet making them in really kind of simple terms. And then I started to think about what happens when technology becomes the size of a blood cell and it enters our body. We eat it, and could it, transform the body and turn the skin, let's say, into a different kind of technology? So this is swallowable perfume that impregnates a pill with color. So you sweat cosmetics and also a biologically enhanced fragrance. And so for me, the question is, does the body become a technology? And in fact, I believe that, the notion of cyborg, this is during the World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders at Exobionics, where I tried on this exoskeleton. I think the notion of a cyborg goes beyond what we know it in science fiction tropes, that actually, the suit of an astronaut turns one into a cyborg because we are able to exist off Earth, which the body is not designed to do. Could we think about CRISPR technology, genetic engineering, where we're able to remove, delete, and replace faulty DNA, that in fact, if you are edited, then you become a cyborg? So I think it's a really great opportunity to think about this notion of where technology meets the body and how that will change who we are, and then throwing into question what makes us human, because I believe that what makes us human are our weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and yet science is on this mission to create perfect humans, removing vulnerability. And so there's this real kind of tension between the capabilities of technology, but also the beauties and weaknesses of us as human beings that have emotions.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And that's very interesting. So I can see that the flawlessness of the futuristic worlds that we so often see in sci-fi is not exactly the future that you emphasize, perhaps, for us human beings, even though you seem very enthusiastic as well about what technology can do for us, right? So before we dive deeper in that discussion, I would like to give the floor to another artist that we have. We're very happy to have her here, and that's Agi Haines. And she's not just an artist, she's also a researcher. So after completing her master's in the Design Interactions Department at the Royal College of Art, she has been undertaking a PhD research at Technology Research. And her work is focused on the design of the human body. So how can people respond, and how will people respond to the possibilities, the things that our bodies can do, as another perhaps everyday material changes it or morphs it? How far can we then push our malleable bodies while still being accepted by society, while still not being seen as a robot, but as a human being, perhaps not being seen as a weirdo, but being seen as an average person? Agi, do you have a short presentation for us to share?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, we see that.
Oh, sorry. At the same time, my sister is ringing me, so I do apologize.
Sisters are important too.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here with everyone today. This is a really exciting panel for me, with such like-minded thinkers. So I'm Agi Haines. I'm an artist, designer, and a researcher, and I really make work about the role design might play, really in like re-evaluating the material or the nature of the material of the body, particularly in relation to sort of nascent biomedical and healthcare technologies. So it's not really something that we often think of all the time, but our bodies are changing and shifting all the time. And this is really my understanding of particularly what Ine talks about when she talks about the cyborg. You know, we're sitting here now and our bodies are changing, they're aging, absorbing, regenerating, and shifting. You know, you might be sort of sitting there having a cup of coffee and your body's digesting it and you're not really thinking about it. But also, you know, at the end of this online discussion, I'm kind of hoping that you might have even developed or perhaps even strengthened things like connections in your brain, which could lead to these sort of lasting thoughts or memories of this very moment in time. And historically, we spent a really long time using sort of technologies as a way to map or expedite things like bodily change, which can make us question the nature of the body altogether. So this is a scan of my head. This was taken at Erasmus MC Neuroscience Department with Jos van de Geest and Marcel Dejeux for the BioArt and Design Awards. And we wanted to scan my brain and convert the neurological map into this sort of artificial neural network, which we use to control a drone with updating learning capabilities. So we wanted to begin to sort of test how the network might change if your mind was in this completely different body, like a drone, questioning if this sort of digital version of my own brain might somehow resemble myself in some way. So technologies such as this could really encourage the material of the body to more frequently enter the designer's toolbox. So if you sort of consider, you know, if you could more easily redesign yourself surgically, perhaps might people more frivolously engage in this activity and use it, say, for the purpose of making yourself more aerodynamic for the sake of sport? Or even might you modify others? So these sculptures, transfigurations, look at how parents might make the decision to surgically enhance their offspring to give them a better chance of survival later in life. So for example, would you extend your baby's head surface area so they can withstand the effects of global warming? So really, I want to look at whether we can use these sorts of provocations as a means to seek out like the ethical boundaries which we want to enhance, or it maybe even violate the boundary of the body. So for example, would a new technology such as bioprinting mean that we don't just, we're not just able to modify the body, but we're also able to create new parts altogether that would take evolution like millions and millions of years to create? So these questions are really what has led me to make the work that's currently on show as part of the Impossible Bodies exhibition, which is called The Anatomy Lesson, Dissecting Medical Futures. And really this piece was made to encourage people to consider what the after effects are of bodily enhancement. So to reveal really like the messier side of often what is Lucy describes as this very like cleanly represented technological feature. So again, like Lucy mentioned, I also take reference often from historical representations of medicine. So for example, this work took reference from the anatomy lesson genre of image making, which really developed in the Netherlands. So it's really great that this work is being shown there. And what this was used often was to sort of test or simulate procedures and also picture like the types of people that were involved in doing this kind of research or practice. So audience members for the anatomy lesson are encouraged to act like medical practitioners and dissect a number of futuristically modified specimens of the future. So I began this project by interviewing a number of researchers who shared with me their fears and excitement concerning research that's currently being undertaken in their respective fields. And we got together and sort of pictured simulations of procedures which the medical practitioners of the future might have to deal with if these sort of techniques or ideas become more mainstream. So for example, audience members can remove a cyst growing on a bionic eye implant. So as many of you know, bionic eyes are something that have been explored time and time again in science fiction, but putting new materials around this really sensitive part of the eye could cause things like inflammation. And I'm sure that many of you know the discomfort of when you get something like a bit of dust or like an eyelash in your eye and it's really uncomfortable. So just imagine what it could be like having this new material put in your eye. And often with the desire for things like new modifications come with it the production of things like non-biocompatible materials. So again, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of all the issues that have happened with breast implantations. And for me, I think having like a knockoff Rolex is like one thing, but having like a knockoff bionic eye implant is like a risk I don't really want to take. So of the 4 procedures that are on show as part of Impossible Bodies, another one allows audience members to sort of try fitting a tooth that could be grown using stem cells in a teratoma growth in the leg and fit it into a gap in the mouth. So these procedures really, they reveal the exciting possibilities of body modifications, as well as the challenges and maintenance involved in creating these new parts. So very excitingly, as part of Impossible Bodies, this augmented reality experience has been produced, which allows audience members to digitally dissect these sculptures in the comfort of their own home. So yeah, thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you, Agi. And it's wonderful how you kind of instantly make clear that it's easy to perhaps judge something if it's far away, but if it would be your kid or your tooth or something that you could do with your own body and you had the choice, then maybe it would become really, really attractive suddenly, right? So I think we have about 20 minutes or so to talk with the panel, with you guys, and I have some questions to all of you. And then again, for people who are watching, if you're watching the video live stream, then do share your questions for the panelists, because then I can share them with them as well later on, and we can have a group discussion. What I wanted to start with, I'm so curious, Frederic and Ine, to both of you, is that when you started curating or organizing these expositions, and then looking back in hindsight about, you know, now that they're there visually still, have you changed your perspective on what it means to be a cyborg, on what kind of cyborgs we should be? Have you learned new things that surprised yourself, perhaps?
Well, I did learn a few things, of course. I don't know if it's about that, the cyborg aspect of it. But what I did learn is that diving into that post-human theme, which is something that we as a museum adopted as a policy line, and also in this exhibition, it's actually as Ine mentioned, it's a humble pie, if you will, that you start eating. Well, a museum is an institution, so you kind of have to do away with perceived objectivity or a stance like that. And I received a lot of feedback from visitors, more than usual, and you know, pointing things out, criticism of sorts, and that made me realize that, well, in Dutch we would say meerstemmigheid. I'm not really sure what well, maybe you can translate that for me.
Is it like a polarizing issue, you think, or more?
Well, that there's different voices to be heard.
Many different voices, yeah.
And that for me was a learning to try to open up to that. So, yeah.
Very interesting. Ine, did you surprise yourself by something you learned or saw in your own exposition?
Well, it's the reason why I am a curator. It's because it's you know, it's just fun to try to envision projects and then work together with all the artists, and you come to see something that kind of, you know, the works talk to each other, and they come and show you a new field again. So that's actually always. So yeah, it's a lot. Of course, in terms of feedback, we are just starting. So there's a difference between Frederic and me.
But you've already seen all the works, so
I have seen all the works, and that's really great. What I do want to say is that I found it very interesting and intriguing, and I think that's also why we are here together. That the Design Museum and the Niedermaal Foundation, you know, kind of focusing both on kind of the similar subject, the cyborgs, like come up with really different positions there, and only sharing one artist, which is kind of, amazing if you are like in the same city in 's-Hertogenbosch, doing these shows, that it's kind of such a large theme, such a like an also invasive theme, that so many different positions can be taken in it. And of course, I mean, and Design Museum, that's what Frederic also says, as of course a different kind of institution. Niet Normaal Foundation actually is not an institution, that gives you some freedom. And what I always like to do is really kind of create a bouquet, if you want, of different artists and different voices that also contradict, or that sometimes, are more affluent together. That really depends, so that you can. And what was really important to do for us, I think, was not so much showing what we call the velvet silicon look and feel of the many cyborgs that we encounter. Is actually a bit what Lucy also described, the kind of sci-fi kind of, and even masculine kind of version of cyborgs. So what we did was selecting artists who questioned the narrow bandwidth within which all humans, cyborgs, and robots are to become interchangeable lookalikes, so because that is, of course, really, of course, and the world is taking, whether it's technology, etc. We are pushed towards becoming more of the same. And I'm so happy to hear that, from Lucy, but also from Frederic and Agi, that there is this interest in also getting this humanness across. And that is, of course, also what I have learned from this whole Impossible Bodies project, that is the main interest of so many of these artists, So what is it that we can call human, because that changes all the time as well. And yeah, that's such an amazing, interesting question. So within that becoming technology, we have the chance to revalue what could be human aspects, or yeah.
And perhaps, if I listen to you correctly, also what we want to maintain, right? What we want to protect.
Exactly, but it's maintain and protect, but it's also revalue, because we lost a lot that we might be, bring to the fore again.
Can I follow up on that question by inviting Agi and Lucy then, because both of you in your presentations, you kind of touched upon the issue that, there's much attention perhaps for cyborgs in sci-fi or in movies, but it makes it look very sleek or very far out. And then you showed, more daily life possibilities perhaps, or things that you can imagine become really attractive. So can I ask the both of you, perhaps starting with Lucy, why do you think it's so important to show that daily life aspect? And why do you think it remains invisible for most people, who still associate cyborgs with the way out there people?
I'm so excited that this is a really big question, not only for artists like Agi and I, but institutes like Frederic's and Ine's, because I think that we're at this really important time of the world where we can democratize the next steps of technology. And I don't think that it should be left to the scientists, the experts, the people who have access, privilege to this technology as an umbrella topic, that it needs to have the bandwidth of the artistic, creative, architectural, curatorial point of view. And I think that the biometric mirror is also about messiness and imperfection. And when, like what Agi said, if we treat the human body as a material, and if we can design biology from scratch, if we get that wrong, you can't turn back. So institutes, museums, and galleries, when working with artists, it's like this laboratory where we can test and we can question the future of where we are headed. And so I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. And I think basically what you say is that the discussion needs to start now. But for that to happen, people probably need to realize, oh, this is a possibility, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I have just one more thing. I think that, you know, I live about 20 minutes away from Hollywood in Los Angeles, and the kind of masculine tropes of science fiction started here, sort of, you know, the origins of it. And I think that the breaking down of corporation is happening, and film is one of the most critical artistic genres right now. And so I have been wanting to give science fiction an overdue sex change. So as an artist, I'm looking at feminizing technology, making it visceral. What does it mean if it is imperfect, like what you would see in Biometric Mirror? So that's another important weak opinion or perspective on technology that is shiny and clinical.
And Agi, you basically try to do the opposite. Well, it's very shiny, but it's also, I think a lot of the attendees were probably closing their eyes when they watched the pincette going into the eyeball, right? But you make it really real, you make it really raw.
Yeah, maybe just to further, this is kind of adding to what Lucy was just saying, but I think artists and designers are also a little bit to blame, because obviously what happens is, I mean, I'm working at the moment in the industrial design department, and the body's been industrialized for a long time in a lot of ways, and designers are sort of trying to represent the body, you know, take stuff and make it commercializable. I don't know if that's a word, but they're trying to commercialize it in a lot of by means of making it look sexy, making it, you know, and this has been going on for a really long time. And so I think now, as Lucy's saying, like, with artists and designers do have a lot of power in the way the body's represented. And I think there's definitely a bit of a paradigm shift going on in terms of the issues that we've seen in previous representations of the body. And there sort of seems to be a bit of a change going on where we're going, oh, there seems to be issues coming out of these representations. And I believe, as a designer, things that haven't been used in design for a long time, that have been used in art, like horror and disgust, can be a really helpful way of showing where there are issues or parts of the body that we might need to be a little bit more cognizant of changing for problematic reasons. So yeah, I think this paradigm shift is actually really helpful, and I think these two exhibitions particularly highlight that.
And so both of you also say things about, you know, the way in which cyborgs perhaps are being portrayed is not the messy reality of what it means to be human. It's not the flawlessness, or it's more the flawlessness. It's not the actuality by which we do things, the vulnerability, Lucy says, perhaps also the not so perfect parts. Ine, you also said something else about what it means to be human, namely the ability to communicate with other beings on this earth. And actually, you said we may have lost that ability. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Yes, well, I think we still live in a very, certainly the Western world, you know, like a very human-centric, we take in a very human-centric position. And you do see that technologies can really, you know, help and add and do it differently. So the kind of the keynote speaker we had for the opening was Neil Harbison together with Moon Ribas, and they are perfect examples of human beings becoming technology, so, like identifying as cyborgs, but identifying as trans species cyborgs. So actually, they purposely choose not to enhance themselves in terms of becoming more clever, more beautiful, more fast, more etc., but actually building or investing in developing other senses that other species, animals have, or the planet even, and in that sense, that could help them make relations and could help them empathize, which is really necessary, because at this moment, we as human beings cannot even think one generation ahead in terms of what we are doing to our planet and how we are kind of fucking up the climate. And we are kind of in a kind of eco-apartheid way of dealing with our environment, and that should change. And I think, technology can really make a difference there if we want to embrace that and if we want to go to that route. And of course, it's what you're saying, democratizing technology and, bringing it closer to human beings and what it can do. And that is not only about, perfecting making the individual more perfect, could be a step ahead there.
Absolutely. Frederic, some of the aspects mentioned about what it basically means to be human, and it's always funny that if you talk about the future and transhumanism, you end up talking about what it is to be human, right? Were already mentioned. So does that resonate with you? Do you recognize it? Or is there anything that you want to add for what it means to be truly human?
Well, I think it's interesting to see that we're gathered here, as Ine said, around a common cause. And as Ine said, there's the subject matter is large enough to support, at least these two curators. There was also a project in the Museum Arnhem called Body Control, which kind of, touched upon the same themes. And it's interesting to see that it's still very much related to the body. And to me, that was an important focal point, because it is in any case. It is in our contemporary image culture. It is in our collection of the Design Museum Den Bosch. Jewelry is very important. And I hear this with the other speakers as well. Ine just mentioned it, in the use of technology, that we can find a way to go away from this one body. That's what BodyDrift means. It's a shift away from the singular body into a multitude of bodies, and with that also moving away from a traditionally humanistic view of what it means to be human. And I think that is a very interesting aspect of the posthuman, and that's something that I'd like to explore more in the consecutive exhibitions.
Very interesting. Lucy and Agi, can I ask you a very nosy or annoying question? There might be people who say, well, what's wrong with not being the messy, I want to be the perfect, flawless person. What would we lose? Why is that so bad? Could you both give an example of that?
Oh, the consequences of designing human flesh. I mean, you could answer that from a spiritual point of view, a personal point of view, a physiological point of view. I guess where do you stop? I want to do this and then I get that. So it then becomes kind of an adventure or question of control and money and access and power. So then, it feels like reality becomes a science fiction world that we start living these characters. So I guess my feeling is to, in a sense, not provide solutions, but to create a platform to show possibilities of what if we do this, do you want this or not? So it's more a soapbox of opportunities to discuss the ethics, the human losses and gains. And as Agi, you know, so precisely put in the beginning, we're constantly changing, defragging, uploading, absorbing. And so the way we feel about it today will be very different to the way we feel about it in 10 years, 10 months. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but yeah, that's...
No, but I think you're saying something really important. So we might be interested in something now, but we don't know where it will evolve, right? And it's hard to stop once we've set things in motion.
We're so adaptive. We adapt. This is a very good example of how we have had to adapt to a very different world, and we submit. And so I think that before we commit and govern new laws, we need to ask and play out, which is why storytelling is so important, because we can dream about a scenario. Do we want this? Sit with it for a while and then realize, no, things need to change and shift and drift and become something different.
Yeah, and it reminds me kind of, I'm currently doing research on the future of love and sexuality. And in many of my interviews, I get people who say, I've unlearned flirting in the streets because it's just scary, and why would I do it? Because I have my app that does it for me. And sometimes I cringe and I think, oh, but it's also so fun and scary, and that's exactly it, right? What it means to be human. Agi, can you give us an example of something that might be attractive, but you also think, ooh, maybe that would, you know, leave us with one thing less of being human?
Yeah, well, in fact, the work that I'm showing, the anatomy lesson, does exactly that. So, for example, one of the researchers that I went and spoke to introduced me to this body clearing technique, decellularization. And a lot of people are doing it with, I don't know, if you Google clear mice, it's really weird, but people are taking color out of mice. And there are a lot of people who are trying to make this work on living material, so not just dead material. And the thing that's really exciting about that, which I picture as part of the anatomy lesson, is that it could be really helpful with things like invasive surgery. So if you can make part of your body clear, that would be great, because then you can see inside, and you wouldn't have as big of a scar. But then they don't know how to reverse the procedure. So would you just be see-through for a bit, and then that's like, what's the payoff? So yeah, there's a lot of really interesting sort of things that might be beneficial in some way and not in others.
Yeah, so again, we have to reflect, right, before we dive in too deep and can't go back.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
I have a question from one of the attendees from the Vimeo live stream for Lucy. The question is, what inspires you to create your artwork? Does the technology impact how you create as well, or is it more a matter of you just looking around in the world? Perhaps you can explain us a little bit about that process.
Good question. I think what inspires me is a curiosity to understand complex science that I don't understand. And so for me, making physically is a way to get my head around what, for example, optogenetics is, which is a technology that uses light and electricity. It treats your brain like a microwave, and it can trigger pleasure or erase memory. And so if I think about that, it seems unrealistic. This is something that's coming out of MIT. But if you then start to understand architecture, the designing of lights in interior instances, then I could begin to make stories or narratives or concepts that help me process what a technology could be. And I think that also being brave to enter worlds that you are not by no means experienced in. So being driven by curiosity and a diversity to do something, even if I don't think that I'm good enough. So if you think you can't, you can. So I think there's a lot of, I'm sure Agi can relate to this, like the compromise and the kind of courage it takes to do and make art is also part of what inspires you, because you kind of have to be stubborn to continue.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you're basically also researching into the unknown, and then something comes out, right? Then,
yeah, it's unpredictable.
Then, Agi, if that's the way you kind of work as well, if you know, being a researcher, being very interested, being very curious, then I think one of the attendees might have a nice suggestion for some of your later works, because this is Melissa, and she's asking, I'm currently exploring the field of digital memory less, it says, but I think it should be memory loss probably. So as humans outsourcing memory to smart devices, and though these smart devices are not literally within our bodies, it does appear as if they are melted into our hands. Do the panelists consider this transhumanism? And if so, what do you think of it? I'm really curious to hear some of your answers. Agi, perhaps.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a big question. It's really interesting. I mean, my understanding is that with posthumanism, it's more concerned with involving non-humans into the equation. Transhumanism for me, and I know a lot of different people have written lots of different things about this, but transhumanism is more like a set of beliefs about where the human is at the center. And I think that particularly things like uploading brain data, which similarly to what Lucy was just talking about, has been explored a lot in sci-fi. I mean, there's loads of great sci-fi about the implications of updating your brain. Just watch Black Mirror, for example. But I think what's quite interesting when we embarked on the drone project was how lo-fi it is. So I went in with this belief, as Lucy was saying, something that I totally didn't understand, going and talking to specialists who were like, actually, it's copying your brain is like pretty much impossible at this stage. So it was quite interesting, again, with the kind of reading and what I'd been exposed to in sci-fi had really trained me to believe something that wasn't really the case. I don't know if that really answers the question, but I think there's still a lot of things to explore in terms of like, if this does become a reality, then really what are the more messy implications that might happen in terms of your sort of personal life. I think of data sharing, etc.
Yeah, and I think also, again, even though storytelling or filmmaking does have, you know, a really important information role, it can also kind of disturb or lead away the attention to things that are really far off, and lead away the attention from the really big questions that underlie it, right? These are the questions that we're now considering, I guess. For Frederic, if you think, if you just said, you know, there's so much going on, even in your own exposition, you see artists who are working with it, you see researchers who are working with it, you see individuals working for it with these concepts. This is a very broad question, but I think a very important one. If we would decide what we want to protect, where we do not want to go as a society, is this even stoppable? Because you can see that there's so many pathways.
The future is now. That's also one of the opening lines of my introductory text, that I think Back to the Future was several years ago. The first Blade Runner was last year, the future dates. So that's interesting. 2020, what a number. I mean, you would read books about it as a kid. I think it's what Lucy said, Agi said. So it is happening, but it's not an unstoppable force. Technology is not an outside actor. It's a part of us, and we have agency. I think the notion of agency is very important also. But we have to be aware. What are the questions that we want to ask, and also I think creating awareness was for me a big part of doing this show. For instance, the part about the biometrics, the devices. It's right here beside me. It's a monitoring device. Not to be paranoid, but just to be alert.
Yeah, And I think, you know, this week, because this virtual exposition and the whole event is still going on, so I would really recommend people to dive into that and to really engage in these debates, because we have to stop for this evening, this event. I'm tracing the time by my extension of my hand.
There you go.
But there's plenty still to see and watch. You can even learn to sing better, you know, so no reason not to engage more. So please do have a look at the website of impossiblebodies.nl. And if you are a non-Dutchy, you can have a / and en at the end, so you can read everything in Dutch. All the events are in English as well. Thank you so much, panelists, for starting this discussion. Like you said, I think there's still much to be debated, much to be thought about, but you have certainly given people food for thought. So thank you very much for being here. And thank you for all the attendees who were in the Vimeo live streaming. I do hope that we meet again in the not so far away future. See you all, and thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Roanne. I just want to announce one more thing, because
Yeah.
there's another panel coming up.
Perfect.
It's Ali Mamali and Ali Esmali and Mamali Shafahi. They made a nerd funk. They actually had received the Gouden Kalf prize of the film festival for the interactive, and it's a beautiful example of actually everything we're discussing here. It's an effect of social media on our persons, on our identities, and on how we live our lives. So please bear with us. It starts at 8 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay, well, time enough for a quick sip of water or a cup of coffee, and then onwards with it.
Onwards. Thank you. Bye. And thank you, Roanne, and everyone for
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
joining.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you.